mean, it's great, but it's unfortunate. Yeah. So I think they have like this ceremony and then there's a dinner.
No, she told me. I was surprised to see her there yesterday, so I got it mixed up.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Hello. My name is Gaëlle Morel, and I'm the curator of the Image Center at Toronto Metropolitan University. On behalf of our team here at the IMC, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight for our artist talk by Clara Gutsche. Is there a sound issue? Is it okay? Sorry. As you know, we are gathered tonight on the downtown campus of Toronto Metropolitan University, which is in turn part of the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We at the Image Center and in the university community feel an ongoing responsibility to live and work conscientiously, thoughtfully, and respectfully on this land that we share with you and so many others. Tonight, we are pleased to be welcoming Montreal-based artist Clara Gutsche, winner of the 2024 Scotiabank Photography Award, whose survey exhibition opened yesterday in our main gallery downstairs. Gutsche's quiet, sensitive photographs reveal something about the lives of her subjects, sometimes through portraiture, but also through careful and sustained attention to their environments, the places where they live, work, and study. From shop windows and industrial rooms to intimate family moments, Clara's images reflect a deep engagement with the material, formal, and memorial qualities of the medium of photography. Thank you again so much, Clara, for sharing your work with our audience here in Toronto. I want to also thank the following people who have helped make this exhibition possible. At Scotiabank, we thank Jackie Allard, Ryan Borella, and Charlotte Priddle. I also want to thank the jury for last year's iteration of the award. They include Mireille Egan, Andrea Cunard, and Stéphane Aquin. Thanks as well to the founder of the Scotiabank Photography Award, Ed Bertinsky. As ever, we are so pleased to work with Bar Gilmore, graphic designer for the show and catalog. Before we begin, I'd like to note a couple of things about tonight's program. First, we are recording tonight's talk and we'll be uploading it to our YouTube channel as soon as we can so it can be seen by those who aren't able to attend in person, as well as those among you who might want to experience it again. And second, after the talk, we will be taking questions from the audience. If you have something you'd like to ask, please wait to pose your question until one of our team members brings you a microphone. That will ensure that we can capture your voice on the recording. So now, please join me in welcoming Clara Gutsche.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming, and I'm thrilled to be here. I want to give a huge thanks to Paul Roth, Gaëlle Morel, Valerie Matteau, and the team, the entire rather extensive team of the Image Center. And I also have a contingent from Montreal here tonight. Zoe Toussignan gave the nomination for my making an application, and that set the process in motion that has resulted in the exhibition downstairs, the talk, and eventually the book. And Chris Forsyth has been my incredible assistant, again, in the preparation of the book and exhibition. And David Miller as well has helped me enormously, continuously. So I will start with my talk. This is a wonderful lecture hall. I can see everyone. Recently, young artists have been asking how and why I started photographing. I take the opportunity of this Image Center talk to offer more thoughts about my background, influences, and motivations than the answer that usually springs to mind. I just did. I resist looking backwards, and the Scotiabank Photography Award year preparing the exhibition and book has been the second major occasion to reconsider the personal, social, and material conditions that produce the 13 series published in the Steidl book and the 9 series exhibited at the Image Center. 2 generations ago, I started photographing in April 1970 when I immigrated to Montreal 6 months before the October crisis. I had spent 1 year in Boston working as a lab technician in a Boston University arthritis research lab. Every day, I ran tests on the patient's blood plasma to determine the severity of their rheumatoid arthritis. Once a week, I drew blood from the patient's arms at the Boston City Hospital clinic where substandard medical care was given to the uninsured. Between 1970 and 1973, David and I lived on Saint Famille Street in Montreal and photographed the Milton Park neighborhood. I had known David since Mr. Klippner's 9th grade English class at University City High School in the Midwest. Our first exhibition was held in 1971 at the University Settlement Center on St. Urban Street, along with Nicholas Deichmann before he moved to Switzerland in 1971. Although I claimed to be self-taught, Nicholas Deichmann and David Miller were my teachers. Nicholas is working in our Saint Famille Street darkroom on the left, and David is repairing his 8x10 camera in our St. Joseph Boulevard apartment where we moved in 1973. Since 1967, David and Nicholas have been developing black and white film and making prints almost every day to publish their photographs in the McGill Daily, which at that time really was a daily newspaper. David traveled with the McGill delegation to the 1967 anti-Vietnam War March on Washington. I went by overnight bus with the Oberlin College protesters. Our experience with the anti-Vietnam War movement and belief that collective effort could create a better society converged with the Milton Park Citizens Committee mobilization to rescue the core buildings from so-called urban renewal. After only a few months photographing, I made the aesthetic-defining decision to place the camera on a tripod to create carefully organized compositions. By 1972, I used the 4x5 Linhof view camera David had bought for himself, which accentuated my formalist aesthetic that stems from the history of view camera photography, painting, and sculpture. I photographed with available light, small apertures, and long exposures when possible. My affinity to the Milton Park interiors was rooted in the high-ceilinged rooms with bay windows, intricate plaster details, and hardwood floors in my grandparents' Chicago Hyde Park apartment. However, to make portraits in high-contrast lighting or in rooms without windows, I used an old movie light bar with 4 250-watt bulbs for fill or as the main light source. I blew the main fuse in one home, and, and the tungsten bulbs shattered at another. David took this photograph of our May 26, 1972, peaceful demonstration in front of the Concordia Estates office on Park Avenue, no connection to Concordia University. Shortly before all 59 of us were arrested, crammed into 2 paddy wagons, and taken to jail. We were held overnight and charged with an indictable offense. As landed immigrants, David and I were deportable. The same night we were held in jail, June Clark and Laura Jones arrived from Toronto with their babies at our dark house and were shocked to find no one at home. They're here tonight. And Pam Harris is here as well. They were supposed to stay with us while the Women's Photography Co-op, organized by Baldwin Street Gallery, installed photographs by women about women at the Centaur Gallery, now Optica. Is the artist an unreliable archivist? I shortened this title to Accidental Archivist. Was published in Photogenic Montreal, tells the story of David's and my 1970 to 1973 photographs of the lost Phase 1 buildings in the context of the later triumphant victory of the saved Phase 2 buildings. Writing the chapter for Photogenic Montreal was the first occasion and imperative to remember how I started to photograph. I reflected on my early adulthood after I left home at 18 years old. The 1976 trip I took to New York City with high school friends Kate Grossman and Margaret Murphy, then to Montreal with Margaret, was seminal. In New York, I bought The Family of Man for $1 and discovered the photographs of exceptional women, Dorothea Lange, Margaret Bourke-White, Helen Levitt, and many more. In Montreal, Margaret and I stayed for 3 days in the Carré Saint-Louis area, where I fell in love with the residential architecture and the walkable bilingual city. At the Museum of Modern Art, I was stunned by the gravitational force of Mark Rothko's painting. In 1969, the year I dropped out of Oberlin College, I was spellbound by an exhibition of original Albrecht Dürer prints at the Allen Memorial Art Museum. I made the unlikely connection to deciding I wanted to make photographs. Jumping forward to 1973, David and I lived on the first floor of the St. Joseph Boulevard duplex, pictured in this photograph. The Chenchik family, the best neighbors imaginable, lived upstairs. David and I spent endless hours sitting with the Chenchik family on the bench between our doors. I felt secure in the precarity of working part-time to support my full-time dedication to photography. David and I had installed a black and white darkroom in our 5-room apartment. Rent and materials were still affordable. In 1974, we lived on $4,000 for 1 year with a Canada Council grant I had been awarded. There are essential societal conditions that made possible my choice to be an artist in Canada: universal health care, public transportation, multicultural neighborhoods, and the relative safety of walking alone in Montreal. For 3 years, I made portraits of the 6 Chenchik sisters who ranged in age at the outset of the project from 8 to 16. I used my 4x5 view camera on a tripod to stage scenes from the daily activities of the girls. I was often squatting or on my knees in order to position the lens at the children's eye level. There are later projects of children, and the same thing applies. I would very often be on my knees to take the photographs. Paul Strand and Julia Margaret Cameron shaped my approach to photographing the Chenchik sisters, along with Eugene Etche, Walker Evans, Lee Friedlander, and 19th century photographers. David and I contacted Stanley Triggs at the Notman Archives of the McCord Museum after we had purchased his and Russell Harper's book, Portrait of a Period, a collection of Notman photographs, 1856 to 1915. We had an open invitation to visit Stanley to look at the collection. I asked my paternal grandmother, Grandma Vera, to send family portraits. Exceptionally, this ambrotype came with a detailed caption about lineage. The baby held by my great-great-grandmother, Mary Ann West Denton, died of scarlet fever. The 4x5 contact prints I made of the six sisters' portraits on worn-tone fiber-based paper created an intentional link to 19th century daguerreotype and ambrotype portraits that are displayed in hand-sized cases. I've always been aware that through making photographs, I draw on pre-verbal and nonverbal observations and sensations from my earliest memories. Nevertheless, I've avoided considering childhood influences. On the left, it's a photograph of our apartment on St. Joseph Boulevard, and on the right, it's the view from the porch of that apartment. It was near the corner of St. Joseph Boulevard and St. Urbain Street. I have perceived an inherent determinism in connections with inherited family and social circumstances. In my early 20s, I was bent on self-definition and opposing all prescribed social norms and attitudes. I grew up in the American Midwest, terrified by the threats of tornadoes and nuclear war with the Soviet Union. I believe that the seeds of my distrust for the US government were planted when our third grade class was ordered by our teacher to descend to the basement, kneel on the cold cement floor facing the wall with our arms over our heads. I understood the futility and the intent to control through fear. I remember thinking that if we were about to be annihilated, I wanted to run home to my mother's arms. Paradoxically, my sense of personal stability allowed my conscious picturing of nightmares in the Black and White Windows 1 series. I photographed displays with headless mannequins or heads without bodies. I was intrigued by looking at darkness as a metaphor for disembodiment and fragmentation. The idea to photograph shop windows began with summertime evening walks in 1976 with David along Park Avenue and St. Lawrence Boulevard before our daughter was born. In April 1978, I continued to photograph shop windows while carrying 4-month-old Sarah on my front in a Snuggly, along with my 5x7 view camera, tripod, and 5x7 film holders. By 1976, I was analytically aware of the insults and injuries that I had endured from the patriarchy. This series of black and white windows is the most dystopic I have produced. The child mannequins are frozen by the constraints of social conventions. However, as the project evolved, I took delight in the whimsical variety of the displays that showed humorous juxtapositions of mannequins, clothing, posters, and objects. I photographed during the day, usually, using the sun to spotlight the displays. The reflections on the glass surfaces mixed with the fluorescent and tungsten lighting produced multiple layers of inside and outside space. The foregrounding of my formal intervention was consonant with the fine arts orientation of the Quebec contemporary arts milieu. The 5x7 negatives are printed on 8x10 silver gelatin paper with a photographic black border that flattens the image plane and evokes nighttime. From the black and white photographs of shop windows I made in Ottawa and Toronto in 1979 and 1980, I jumped forward 20 years to August 2000 in Paris. 30 years after immigrating, I felt rooted in the familiarity of Montreal. In the 21st century, I wished to photograph elsewhere to seek unfamiliarity. During the last 2 weeks of my 3-month Canada Council residency in the Paris studio, I started to photograph shop windows in color along Rue Saint-Antoine. I'm proud of the 2 holes in my CV when I recorded a few solo exhibitions. These gaps correspond to the early childhood years of my daughter in the 80s and my granddaughter in the 2010s. I had always planned to expand the Windows series to the exploration of different cities to show how windows reflected cultural values. Both the Windows 1 and Windows 2 series are walking art projects motivated by the exploration and mapping of urban streets. The color shop window photographs show a strip of sidewalk in the foreground that accentuates my viewing position in the urban space. The frame of the store facade architecture replaces the photographic black border I used for printing the black and white Windows 1 series. The majority of the photographs in the Windows 2 series were made in Rome in 2002 during my 6-month residency in the Conseil des Arts et des Lettres Québec studio. Frequently, I was accosted by La Polizia to be told that placing a tripod in public space was illegal. I was ordered to leave and to stop and leave. In 2008, I extended the series in Basel for 6 months, where I held the Conseil des Arts et des Lettres Québec studio. I was relieved to learn that photographing with a tripod in public space was legal. Geometric grids characterize the built environment of Basel. The most recent photographs were made during the pandemic in Montreal, when I went walking with my view camera along pedestrian-only streets. While these photographs are visually influenced by modernist painting and sculpture, they advocate the vitality of neighborhood-centric cities. I contend that small, owner-operated stores with street-level entrances are essential components for building and maintaining communities. Will the municipal, provincial, and federal political will be galvanized to protect the built and social fabric of our affordable, human-scaled urban neighborhoods? Going in a slightly different direction, I want to highlight that belonging to numerous communities in the 1970s was foundational. Neighborhood associations, mainly the Milton Park Citizens Committee, along with women's and photographers' communities, brought lifelong friendships, projects, and inspiration to my life and art practice. This is the Sainte Famille Women's Center, and I joined many activities while we lived in Milton Park from 1970 to 1973. I was among the founding members of Powerhouse Gallery, now La Centrale, in 1973 on Green Avenue. The first exhibition was titled Windows from the Inside Out. The meetings for the 1971 Photo Montreal project were held at the home of Doreen Lindsay and Gabor Selassie. David and I met the Groupe d'Action Photographique Claire Beaugrand-Champagne, Michel Campeau, Roger Charbonneau, Pierre Godard, Serge Lorrain, and Gabor Selassie. The famous D'Israeli project, produced by Claire, Michel Roger, Cedric Pearson, and 2 researchers, was the subject of the 2022 McCord Museum exhibition, D'Israeli Revisited, curated by Zoe Toussignan. Ron Solomon was the mentor who had the greatest impact on the trajectory of my artistic career. He was charismatic. An excellent large format photographer, he thrived on bringing together the photographers he was meeting as curator at the NFB Still Photography Division in Ottawa to create a community. He organized the Gatineau workshop in 1973. Dimitri Rousopoulos, the late Lucia Kowalik, Phyllis Lambert, the Milton Park Citizens Committee, and hundreds of residents and professionals were indispensable to saving the Phase 2 buildings of Milton Park and creating the largest cooperative housing project in North America. David's and my fight to save the Milton Park neighborhood coincided with the urban activism of Phyllis Lambert, founder of Heritage Montreal and later the Center for Canadian Architecture. We met Phyllis following her visit to our 1973 Milton Park exhibition at the McCord Museum. Phyllis wrote in her introduction to the 2025 SPA Steidl book, quote, "This modest 23-photograph exhibition held in the recently resurrected McCord Museum was electric for me. I had just returned to my native city, Montreal, from the United States, where the government's post-war urban renewal program was, ironically, causing the disheartening destruction of our inner cities," end quote. In 1981, David and I collaborated with the Heritage Montreal exhibition, 12 parmi les édifices sauvegardés, or 11 among the saved buildings, for which I took my first photograph in the convent series. My projects often start in architecture. In 1985 and 1986, David Miller and I were commissioned by Phyllis Lambert and the Canadian Centre for Architecture to photograph the abandoned industrial architecture along the Lachine Canal in Montreal. We intentionally repeated the pattern we had spontaneously employed for the Milton Park project. I photographed interiors, and David photographed urban landscapes and building exteriors. The Lachine Canal series is the most lyrical I have produced. I believe that classical music is an elusive and indescribable presence in my art practice. The soundtrack of my childhood was Bach cantatas, Mozart, Schubert, Schumann, Beethoven, chamber and vocal music, and Summertime, sung by Leontine Price. In a short intermission interview for the Met Opera 2024 HD production of Tosca, Yannick Nézet-Séguin said that music starts where words end. I've always been intrigued by pictorial representations of figures in relation to architectural structures. In my childhood home, I loved the framed reproduction of this Peter de Hooch painting. And I was always captivated by interior architecture. Every time my parents took the family when I was 6, 7, 8 years old to the St. Louis Art Museum, located in the Olmsted-designed Forest Park, I ran to the Gothic stairway. I imagined people on the third floor balcony looking down, or wished I could climb the stairs to see the view from the high perspective. I was very unhappy when they dismantled the Gothic stairway. The utilitarian form follows function buildings along the canal were often suffused with glowing light. The radiant highlights and deep shadows of the chiaroscuro lighting accentuate the drama of the interiors. The composition of the photograph on the right was based on the broken 8x10 glass plate negatives I had seen in the Notman archives. The Redpath sugar refinery had the most impressively cathedral-like dimensions. It is 7 stories high to accommodate the sugar refining process that moved from the upper to the lower stories. On the right, David was horrified when my foot, then my legs sank down through the rotten floorboards in the Mill Street fire station. All factual evidence to the contrary, my mother convinced me that we belonged to a matriarchy of remarkable women. Grandpa Einer took this photograph of 4 generations. Alice Gutsche is on the right, wearing a hat. My mother was proud of her single-parent mother who had a university degree and supported an extended family household of 4 adults and 3 children during the Great Depression with her administrative position in the University of Chicago Business School. From 1982 to 1989, I made an extended portrait of Sarah between the ages of 4 and 11, often in relation to her best friend Noemi, who lived on the east side of Genmont Street. With my 5x7 camera, I repeated many of the close framing and simplified background strategies I had used for the Chenchik sisters' portraits. I asked for the children's patience to hold still during my long exposures. I bribed Sarah and Noemi with chocolate. I also made portraits of Sarah with my late godson, Eric, and my goddaughter, Jessica. This 2022 portrait of my goddaughter Jessica's children, Sydney and Bowie, belongs to the Siblings and Singles series that I started in 2008 during the Kelk studio in Basel. The complete series of 32 color siblings and singles photographs, as well as 32 black and white photographs from the Chenchik series, Sarah, and Parkscapes projects, were published by Optica in the 2024 book, Portrait d'Enfants, Children, with essays by Marie-Josée Lafortune, Diane Charbonneau, and preface by Zoe Toussignan. My niece, Alice, and nephew, Oliver, on the cover are now 22 and 19 years old. My mother told stories about her childhood, her mother, and her grandma Polly Nash. She instilled my sense of generations being a web of relationships and a measure of time. My personal title while working on the Siblings and Singles series was The Children of Our Children. Avi and Noemi Avi and Clara are Noemi's children and Sherry Simon's grandchildren. Isaac and Martin are June Clark's grandchildren and the children of Anna, who is 3 years old in this portrait and had been 3 weeks old when she stayed at our St. Famille Street apartment for a few days after David and I returned home from our night in jail. I'm very grateful for the collaboration of all the children who posed for my view camera portraits. These slides show the process. Very often, the children would shift out of the frame. With a view camera composition, you're under a dark cloth, and once you've set up the composition, you have to close the shutter and hope that everything stays the same. in the middle image, I brought studio flash lighting outside. You can just see the edge of my umbrella on the right. I set the flash to different intensities in relation to the ambient daylight. Usually the flash provided fill lighting and sometimes was the visibly dominant light. Rarely, I gave the control to choose the moment of exposure to Sarah and to Hannah. They are holding the air release bulb on a cord attached to the shutter release. On the left, I'm holding the 5x7 dark slide during the exposure. My photography practice is centered in craft, the original print as object, and exhibitions which create the direct relationship between the viewer and the print. The original prints in the Sarah series are 5x7 contact prints made on Chicago Albumin Works printing out paper, which has its antecedents in 19th century albumin paper. Sadly, the paper has been discontinued. The POP paper was exposed to direct sun in a contact frame, often propped up on this type of frame for holding the contact printing frames, to produce a visible image. In the darkroom, the exposed paper is developed in a solution of gold, then fixed, hypocleared, and washed. I wanted to find another distinctive print medium with historical antecedents for the recent Hannah black and white portraits. To be able to include the series in the exhibition and book, I fast-forwarded the selection and production decisions. I chose Silver Shack's gum over palladium print process to make 11x14 prints from digitally enlarged 11x14 negatives. I used an 8x10 camera with the initial intention to make 8x10 contact prints for my urban landscape series of Genmans Park, but I eventually chose 16x20 enlargements. The parkscapes result from motherhood and my frequent mother and child outings to the playground. The park was an oasis of open mental space and expansive vistas. I also wanted to explore the genre of landscape photography, with strong influences from 19th century landscape photographers, notably Carlton Watkins, and the contemporary new topographics photographers. I minimized tonal and emotional drama with the high-key tonalities of open shadows and bright midtones. The photographic skies are dense and bear as much visual weight as the ground. My wide-angle lens created expanded and textured foregrounds that are references to color field painting. The parkscape compositions are always bounded in the background by the rectilinear city streets and buildings. And on the left, I want to point out the mountain, capitalized, that is beloved by Montrealers. Years after I completed the parkscapes, I realized that I had photographically replicated in Montreal the spacious skies and gentle hill topography of the Missouri and Illinois plains where I grew up. The photograph on the right was taken at the St. Louis Zoo, the left on the beach of Ogden Dunes, Indiana. Ogden Dunes was the most enchanting place of my childhood. There was still wild and undeveloped land just beyond the hamlet. Grandma Martha led our expeditions up and down Indiana sand dunes to find pollywog ponds and to make the dunes grass sing. Different project. The convent series sprang from years of living in Quebec as an immigrant. I grew up taking for granted the comfort of being a member of the majority culture in the States. This project is about experiencing and understanding difference, feeling simultaneously inside and outside my adoptive society. Illuminated by the lingering summer evening light, the Carmelites on the right were singing plain chant for Vespers with clear, ethereal voices in unison. Between 1990 and 1996, I traveled to many Quebec cities and villages to photograph over 25 active and cloistered communities. The cloistered nuns who lived behind a grill in seclusion from the secular world still wore the traditional habit. I perceive these communities as the most visual and distilled representation of Catholicism as a cultural phenomenon. The red scapular worn by the précieux sang, or precious blood, communities symbolizes devotion to the Passion of Christ. I wish to know more about these communities of women who lived independently of men in the domestic dimension of their lives. They were welcoming and extraordinarily kind. When I arrived at the door with my large case containing the 4x5 camera, lenses and film holders, my large tripod, my studio flash and light stands, they rushed to find a cart and insisted on helping to lift the equipment. On the left, Sœur Ruth is reading Le Devoir. The nuns know what is happening in society beyond the grill. When I stayed in the convents for the 2 or 3 days they had invited me, I felt as if I were visiting a sorority of sisters, mothers, and grandmothers. I was touched to receive these snapshots sent by the Sœur Clarisse after I returned home. We were in the cloister garden where I staged this photograph. I spaced the 4 nuns in a line against the middle gray background of the high cement wall. I asked 2 of the women to hold still and 2 to gently hit the tennis ball. The wind added a sense of spontaneity to my combining control and chance when making the image. The convents represent a distinguished history of recognized female accomplishment, which has no equivalent in Anglo-Protestant society. Ever present as paintings or statues, these women are revered for their contributions to New France society beginning in 1639. Marie de l'Incarnation, Jeanne Mance, Marguerite Bourgeois, and Marguerite Duville achieved a prominent place in historical accounts alongside Champlain, Frontenac, and Maisonneuve. For many years, I had admired 19th century photographs of religious communities. Ellison and L.P. Vallée are favorites. And this photograph of Les Sœurs du Précieux Sang was directly inspired by the photographs of L.P. Vallée. It took 10 years to find the physical space that allowed the arrangement of the nuns in 2 symmetrical rows. The light patterns cast by the cloister windows were magnificent. La Prieure, or Mother Superior, is standing at the back of this row of nuns, the photo on the right, who were competing to be close to the camera. She and I exchanged raised eyebrows and bemused smiles. Then we quickly established a rational sequence of the shortest to the tallest, front to back. The high school series grew out of the convent series. And for the high school series, I returned to photographing a subject with a personal connection. Sarah, Eric, and her friends were the same age, progressing through grade 7 to grade 11. Their teen years recalled my own adolescent high school experiences, which I reshaped and recontextualized through making this series. Both the convent and the high school series explore visual manifestations of Quebec cultural values. Both series juxtapose individual identity with social and community identity. By photographing the rituals of this nearly universal daily experience of the young, I attempted to make visible some of the underlying attitudes and expectations. There is a subtext in the classroom where the exploration of social and sexual relationships is the real content behind the official high school curriculum. My photographs started with the observation of the school spaces and talking to students and teachers. Sometimes I photographed a planned activity. Sometimes I chose a space for the setting, then asked willing participants to pose for portraits. In the high school series, all the portraits show a minimum of 2 students together to emphasize social relationships. Many photographs in the convents and high school series resemble stage sets with actors in arrested choreography. My parents were very generous with tickets to concerts. My photographs that place figures in rectilinear spaces are the result of viewing from the audience perspective the lighted stage performances of chamber music, dance, and opera. The bedroom series grew out of my work in Quebec high schools. Some schools had dormitories with private rooms for senior students. I had mostly been photographing people and wished again to photograph rooms with natural light when their inhabitants were absent. On the right, I traveled with Natasha Martin to Saint-Denis de Kamouraska to photograph her aunt's summer house after it had been prepared and closed for winter. In 2000, I photographed bedrooms as my main project in Paris during the 3-month residency in the Canada Council studio. Evoking the presence of people through their artifacts has been a recurring theme in my work. Time is indeterminate. The photos do not reveal whether people have just left or are about to enter the room. Bedrooms are body spaces with both banal and intimate connotations. The driveway of our Kingsbury Boulevard house in University City is where I locate my first awakening to the expressive power of the still photograph. My maternal grandparents had just parked after driving from Chicago. While holding my Grandma Martha's twin-lens reflex camera, I became enraptured by looking down at the images on the ground glass. I was incensed when she repossessed her camera. I grasped the creative agency of selecting squares of time and space to transform the scene in front of the lens into an image. I was 10 years old. No one thought to give me a camera. Mother said that she and my father believed they were bringing up 3 scientists. I am the eldest, Betha 1 year younger, and Christopher 8 years younger. Indeed, I studied chemistry at Oberlin College for 2 years. My parents were 51 years old in this photograph that I took with David's 6x6 Minolta autocord on a trip to St. Louis. And at home, I had always admired my father's space-filling models of organic chemicals. They are 3D representations of spatial relationships between spherical color-coded atoms held by electronic bonds in different configurations. They are sculptures. My photography borrows the close observation of natural phenomena from the scientific method. Nevertheless, I produce photographs which are constructed with subjective choices and emotional content. In 1987 and 1988, I was commissioned by Phyllis Lambert and the CCA, along with many other photographers, to make 20 visits to the evolving construction site of the new CCA building and the renovation site of the Shaughnessy House. Even the seemingly formalist architectural project contained a component of unconscious response that eventually surfaced as recognition. The most surprising experience of pregnancy was the change of my body boundaries and the resulting altered spatial relation between my external surface and the spaces through which I moved. Each successive session was a new challenge to find order in chaos. I felt disoriented by the random placement of all the construction tools and materials left by the workers when they had departed on Fridays. It was cold and quiet. I walked around for an hour to find the first composition. During the long exposures, often 15 to 30 minutes, I wandered from space to plan the next photograph. Every image I see on the 4x5 ground glass is upside down and laterally reversed. The displacement movements of the view camera provide plasticity to the process of arranging each composition. With rise-fall, I keep the vertical lines parallel. With shift, along with the placement of my camera viewpoint, I choose the alignment of foreground, midground, and background objects. And with tilt and swing, I can change shapes and control focus throughout the field of view. The CCA construction series embodies what I saw on the twin lens ground glass at 10 years old, the perpetually surprising transformation of the three-dimensional moving subjects into highly detailed images that is exerted by composition and imagination. Each photograph is an abstraction, a two-dimensional graphic pattern of the shape of space and light. Thank you. So I hope I left time for questions. That was part of the...
Thank you, Clara. That was wonderful.
Oh, I can just stay near the mic.
So we're going to start the Q&A now. Just a reminder, we've got a couple of folks walking around with microphones. If you raise your hand, I will try to get to everyone that we can. And then I just ask that you wait until you get the microphone in your hands so that you can ask your question. It can be heard on the recording that we're making, and also by everyone in the room. I would like to start, actually, with a question that occurred to me. I have to say, first of all, I thought that was such a wonderful talk because it was so comprehensive about your thinking, about the process of making your work. And I really, really appreciated that. And you did it in a way that, we have all experienced the phenomenon of listening to photographers talk about which camera they use, right? And somehow you didn't do that at all, and yet you told us in really significant detail, along with everything else that you were talking about, how it is that you make your pictures. But there was one thing that I did want to hear about, which is how do you choose the many different processes that you have used project by project, because I think that that's one of the things that strikes me so much about your work is the incredible variety of format, of material, moving from black and white to color, different cameras. It's very conscious, it's very specific to the project, and I wondered if you could speak a little bit about how you make those decisions at the outset. And is it difficult? Is it easy? Does it come naturally? Do you have to work toward it?
am not sure. It's a I am not sure because I think what happens is I do a project for as long as it's interesting to me. A project ends when the sense of excitement and curiosity somehow evaporates. Or there's some dramatic change. In the case of Milton Park, the first part of the neighborhood we've been trying to save was destroyed, and we moved out of the neighborhood. I feel that a lot of times one project follows another, and it has similarities or some relationship, but also I always want to try something new and different. So I'll give one example from Milton Park and the just pure luck of moving next door to the Chenchik sisters. As a subject, it was just magnificent. I really wanted to photograph over time a group, children, or I wanted to make an extended portrait series over time with a more intimate framing. So that was the first change. Sometimes I don't have in mind when I start the project how I'm going to print the photographs. More often than not, that's a decision I make much later. In fact, I've very typically waited to print my photographs for 3, 4, even 5 years after I finish photographing. And I find the passage of time a really fantastic way to cull out the pictures I thought were wonderful when I took them and turn out to be maybe not so interesting 3 to 5 years later. So there are many factors involved. With the Chenchik sisters, it did coincide with spending so much time looking at 19th century photographs, either at the Notman Archives or at the National Gallery, or, it was just a natural interest. And then also photographically, if you're a view camera photographer, you hear over and over again that the contact print is the best print possible. So there was, that combination of events and influences and thinking. I would have to go project by project because I think that I wanted to always do something different from one project to the next. Sometimes the project overlap a little bit. Most of the time, one project follows another. The transition to color was by necessity. I had been wanting to photograph in color for quite a while. I've been seeing images in color. I was in the middle of doing the convent series, really, immersed in the main production from 1990 to 1996 of the convent series. To get access to the convents, I had to, I wrote letters, they never answered. I visited the convents. I talked to the Mother Superior. She talked to her community. 3 or 6 months later, they invited me to stay for 2 or 3 days. In 1992, we moved from one house to another, and I had 2 visits lined up. I had 2 specific times when I was invited to photograph 2 different convents. So I switched to color because I knew we wouldn't have a black and white darkroom. So, it's a hard question to answer because in the life of an artist, if I think about decisions, I acknowledge that there's really an element of chance and randomness in how you make different decisions.
Wonderful.
I don't know if that...
No, that was
your question.
wonderful. By the way, I realized I forgot to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Paul Roth. I'm the director at the Image Center, and I'm very happy to be doing the Q&A tonight. Does anyone have any questions? There's someone right over here.
Thank you, and thank you for your incredible work. I have a question based on your conversation about the use of color versus black and white, and which of the two, or how do you feel about each and which do you prefer and why, or how do you feel about each and why?
I like black and white when I'm doing black and white projects, and I like color when I do color projects. You see differently. And for some of the convents, I think it was even before we moved in 1992, I made the mistake of taking both black and white and color film, and I sometimes just made a technical mistake of exposing the color film when I thought I had black and white. But more significantly, you see differently. If you're thinking about making a black and white picture, you compose everything in the masses of dark and light. And if you're making color photographs, the colors create the main dynamics of the composition patterns. So again, it was, something that I had wanted to do, partly because, fortunately from early childhood, I've been visiting museums, and I just really am influenced by painting and sculpture, and the color photographs explore that influence more than the black and white photographs. Just to complicate things, I'll say for my most recent project of my granddaughter Hannah, I started that project in color and then decided, this is a project that needs to be in black and white.
Thank you.
So.
Anyone else? Right over here.
Because
it is for several reasons. One is I started to get tired of the impermanence of color. Chromogenic color lacks permanence. And with the respect that I have for my dear granddaughter, I wanted to make photographs which would last in time. So that was one of the motivations. Another one is that the project is really quite connected to the series I did of my daughter Sarah with her friends, which is also connected to the Chenchik series. So those are all black and white projects. And so I just wanted to create a kind of association and continuity between those three projects.
Okay. Back there.
thank you for a fascinating talk. I'd like to put two things together. One is your incredible capacity for empathy and warmth, which comes out in all your pictures of people. And the other is what you say was one of your great motivators, which was your interest in Quebec culture. So we see now your pictures of the convent series. They're fantastic, and they carry this signature warmth. You see everything about it says respect and warmth and dignity of these women. But during the time you were taking those photos, I would wager that most people weren't interested in those women and those places in the way that you were. And it's remarkable today to see how important it was that you were doing that. So during the time you were doing this series, did you feel that you were somehow, you were doing something a little bit transgressive for the time?
I knew that there was really, and not even a lack of interest in my generation in Quebec, but an antipathy. At a certain point, I did the convents over a long period of time, but discontinuously. I started in 1980 with the Grey Nuns Mother House. I did some more projects, photographs in the Dawson College Mother House. And it was in the late 80s, I did some photographs, and I haven't retained them in the main series. During this entire length of time, things were evolving in Quebec City, in Quebec society in relation to, how people thought about their past. one of my motivating reasons for doing the convents was to use an American idiom. I wanted to be a burr under the saddle, which means that I wanted to pick up and make visible what I thought was a really foundational phenomenon in Quebec, the monolithic control of the Quebec Church up until maybe the 1950s, 1960s, that my generation was denying. And I found denial really interesting. So that's what got me started. And it was also when I worked in the darkroom, I switched between Radio-Canada and CBC. It was a way of keeping up with the news, but also learning more French. I have a good comprehension of spoken French. And I always wish I could read and write more coherently than I do in French. I started to notice that the politicians like Lucien Bouchard would use a different tone and say different things about exactly the same topic in French and English. And that was fascinating. To live in Quebec and participate in both the French and English cultures is to have a constant education in cultural relativity, which I'd already been feeling because to move from the States to Canada is already a difference. So it started in thinking that listening to these politicians who I thought sounded like priests at the same time that they were denying that there was any residual influence of Catholicism in Quebec society. While I was doing the project, I consciously thought to myself that there would be no interest in the project. And I just wanted to do it. And this is, for better or for worse, I'm very glad that ignoring trends has resulted in the Scotiabank Photography Award and an exhibition and a book. But that's the truth of it. When I was finally ready to exhibit the photographs, people were starting to have an interest in their past, because I think it started to be far enough back to be able to consider that past influence. So they were not interested. I knew it, and I did the project anyway.
So I have a related question, both about the empathy that you singled out, and also about this disinterest that you felt in the lives of people. One of the things I loved about your talk is that you showed images of yourself, and you showed your life with David, and you showed the things that you've done throughout. And of course, there were these two wonderful images of you at a women's center. And I wondered to what extent you've thought of your portraiture as a kind of quiet practice of feminism, because it's such an extraordinary, sustained series of portraits of the lives of women, whether we're talking about the convents or your family members or the sisters that you photographed early on, the Chenchik sisters. So to what extent was that conscious?
Again, a level of actually taking the photographs, it grew from my deep and personal interests. When I look at the entirety of my work, I think that it is, at the very least, profoundly influenced by my experience as a girl and a woman, and that naturally leads to placing value on my own experiences and the experiences of girls and women. I do think it's a theme that's recurrent, that's fairly prominent in my work. I do sometimes ask myself that question, whether my work has political content. I prefer to have that answered by other people. It's partly a perception of the audience. I would say that as a photographer that I feel that I'm trying to place value on the lives of girls and women, as you said.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? Back there, all the way at the back.
Hi. I'm kind of curious about what you're thinking of photographing next in terms of this expression you used of the burr in the saddle, and what are you continuing with that? Like, is that a place, it leads back to this question about feminism, but I'm deeply curious if you have any projects in mind that you haven't started yet that might fall under that idea of being a burr in the saddle.
Well, stated that way as a question, I think the burr under the saddle was specific to the convent project and specific to my relationship to Quebec society as an English-speaking immigrant. And to this day, I feel my immigrant status in Quebec in a way that I probably wouldn't if I lived here in Toronto, because I do make an effort to speak French, read Le Devoir, I listen to Radio-Canada. And if you speak with an accent, it's a very different experience of living somewhere than if you speak impeccably without an accent. The Compa project is an exception in some ways. Partly the burr under the saddle, my photographing something that was different, or to which I didn't have a prior connection. To answer your question about what I'm going to photograph next, I don't know. I have one project I abandoned that I doubt that I'll pick up again. I was photographing couples who were 60 years old or older. So I have the start of a project. I might, if I do pick it up again, I'm going to slightly reformulate that project into something broader, generations, where it's not just two people of the same age. Right now, I'm interested in putting together different assortments or choices of photographs in books. I don't have publishers, but this is something that I intend to do just as limited production artist books, that's what, I'm always working on a project. I always have something that I want to do to keep me busy.
Okay. We have time for one last question over there.
Thank you for the talk, but it's very clear how much time has been an important part in your work. Just thinking about the passing of time in people's lives, and your time in different neighborhoods. And so just to ask about your photographing of places or changing neighborhoods or industrial heritage, you spoke to the fact that you don't often look at these projects for a number of years, or you make the images and then you make the prints later. Looking back at all this work on kind of changing urban space or architecture, how do you feel that work speaks now, and what do you feel that contributes?
For the project, like the Lachine Canal project? Yeah, sure. Or, well, which projects do you have in mind?
Any of the
I mean, the Milton Park project is quite wonderful because it stays alive, because the second phase 2 buildings were not torn down. And it's a large cooperative, and many curators, historians, urban researchers are interested in the Milton Park neighborhood. For the Lachine Canal, at this point, they're quite frankly images to me. All of those buildings have been turned into condominiums or used in different ways. I think they're almost all residential buildings now. I haven't done a thorough inventory. And those are the two urban projects. For the parkscapes, in a way, that's an urban project as well. And when I look at those, I think about the playground equipment that has changed dramatically because those merry-go-rounds and jungle gyms were in fact quite hazardous. But at a certain point, the photographs, once you put them out in the public as exhibitions, they they take on a life of their own because you're starting to, have feedback from different audience responses.
Okay, let's wrap it up there. I want to thank, we do have one more person? Okay, one last question.
Clara, I think I love your images, the ones where you've staged the nuns and being in color, which is, I said, oh, wow, Clara's doing color, look at that. And you did it so well. And so I guess I'm wondering also, why and how why did you decide to stage the actions? And how? Because it really did, they really resulted in great pictures.
The why is probably just what I referred to at the end of talking about the high school series. It's just the way I see things. And when you're using a view camera, you are working with a lot of constraints which you try to turn into advantages. And it was, as I said at the beginning, as soon as I put a camera on a tripod, I was thinking about geometry and compositions. And on some level, unconsciously probably, having an influence from painting and sculpture and just all sorts of art forms. I think that the staged work comes out of, these multiple influences of, I referred to looking at stage performances from an audience perspective. And I think it's just partly, the nature of doing view camera work. Just more generally, anytime you do a posed portrait, it's inherently directorial. So I think it's just something I've always done. I don't really have a different answer.
Thank you all very much for being here. I want to remind you that the exhibition will be on view until August 2nd. Please tell your friends about it. Please come see it again. I want to pay special thanks to the contingent that's come from Montreal, Clara's community. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to single out Zoe Toussignon, our wonderful colleague from Montreal. Thank you all so much, and especially thank you, Clara.
Well, thank you.